Thanks very much. Am I on? Can everyone hear me? Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for attending this talk. I'm Graham. I'm the CEO of Carafi and one of the founders of the business. Here today to talk about how TA can raise its impact, raise its profile within boardroom tables and be seen as a strategic driver of an organisation, not just a tactical delivery function. Little bit on me. I started working recruitment probably like many of you. I started my career in agency in 2001. By 2008, I'd started to get a little bit frustrated by the models that are out there in recruitment as it was then, rather than talent acquisition. Hadn't even renamed itself by then. But back in 2008, there were really three models as I saw them. One was that kind of contingent agency type world that would sacrifice an awful lot of volume in order to protect margin. You had the RPO solutions really starting to take a grip, and they would do the complete opposite. They would sacrifice a little bit of, or an awful lot of margin in order to secure big volumes. And then you had this growing internal function, many of whom had come from one of the two other options, and they were really trying to justify their existence based on how little an organisation spent on option 1 and 2. So since that time, I've been trying to work with TA professionals to start to think about how can we raise the profile? How can we answer the paradox that's out there in our world where people tend to buy recruitment based on cost, but the users of a recruitment service are solely focused on quality. So how can we think of a third way, or how can we start to think about talent acquisition, not as a costed service or a commodity, but actually as a business driver? So how did I do that? For my first go, we started a talent consulting business called Consort, became RTM, sold that to a venture capitalist firm in 2015. And one of the challenges that we had at that point, I left that business a couple of years after selling it to start Carafi, because there was something a little bit missing. We kind of went to go and answer a problem by thinking about how we can generate as much revenue as we can. We were relatively successful at that, but something was missing. Over the last couple of years, 4 or 5 years, we've started to really hone in on what that is. And it's really about a purpose. And what is that purpose of talent acquisition? So as a business, we set up a talent acquisition consulting firm to help everyone who are internal try and build brilliant strategies. And our purpose can be defined really simply as the journey from TA to CPO to CEO. Now, many of you will recognize that that's a really difficult journey. In fact, it's a journey that no one has ever done. So CPOs are not considered the natural successor of a CEO. In the Fortune 500 and the FTSE 250, not one CPO has become a CEO. But also, within the talent acquisition space, very few end up becoming CPOs or considered as a CPO. Many of you, in order to, if you look at received wisdom, you would say in order to be considered as a business professional, you might have to move into HR, a more grown-up job, or operations, or something in that order. For us, that's just unacceptable. And so what we end up doing is we built this business based on that one purpose, that single purpose. How do we help TA professionals become CPOs and CPOs become CEOs? So enough about me. We'll get into what we're actually here to talk about, which is around over 15 years of working with CEOs, CPOs, TA directors, and some really brilliant people. We've kind of learned a lot of things that we used to sell as consulting. We used to almost go to organizations and say, you don't know what you're doing, but we do. So pay us loads of money. The reality is now the shift in this business is about sharing a load of information. What are our observations? How can we help people accelerate their career, be seen as business people that know an awful lot about talent acquisition, not good recruiters that know a little bit about business? So, in a nutshell, what keeps your average CEO up at night? Or leader of a business or founder? There really are only three things. Customers and product. Do I have the right customers? Are they using the products in the right way? Are they spending enough money? Are they likely to continue spending money and more money? And have we got enough revenue in to satisfy our shareholders? That's point number one. Pretty obvious, right? That tends to be run by the chief marketing officer or the product officer. The second is, have I got enough cash? So have I got enough money to fuel any acquisition? Have I got enough money to fuel any programs of work or transformation programs? Or have I just got enough cash flow in order to sustain the business and the business model we have? That tends to be run by a finance director, obviously, or a CFO. The third, and this is absolutely critical, because when we put it up here, it's quite obvious, but it isn't how people behave. It's probably not how many of us behave sitting in the room. The third most important thing that keeps CEOs up at night is, have I got the right people in the right jobs, doing the right things? Not just for today, but for the future. Now, what makes that really fascinating is there isn't anything else for a CEO to worry about. Have I got products and customers? Have I got enough money? Have I got the right people? Only one of those positions never becomes the CEO. Now, my idea, and I think in terms of all the research that we've had, is a lot of that is because we don't articulate that importantly enough. Now, I'm not going to harbour on too much about CPOs and potentially a lot of your bosses today and their weaknesses and so forth. What I'm trying to say is it's a collective people issue. Now, we can start that from talent acquisition because we're in a brilliant position around data, metrics, and actually we're talking about one of the most important things. So the first thing that we all have to collectively understand and take responsibility for is that we matter. We really, really matter. There isn't a CEO that doesn't worry about it. And there's some fantastic stats, probably better than the ones that I found a couple of days ago and put up here. But number one thing on the majority of CEOs' minds is, I don't think I have the right type of talent for tomorrow's economy. Now, we talk about a new economy all the time. We talk about more digital, more data, more whatever. But that existed 20 years ago when the internet came in. Before that, when the telephone came in. There's always been a new economy on the horizon. So this is an age-old problem, and one that we have to take collective responsibility for. So I'm going to go through any of these stats. We'll share some of the screens, and I'm sure you can read them. But suffice to say, it doesn't matter whether you read McKinsey, it doesn't matter whether you read PwC, it doesn't matter whether you read The Economist, or any kind of literature that you see. If you were to interview or just meet your own CEOs, if you were to interview them, very quickly, if not first, their biggest challenge is, have I got the talent that will take my business on forward? So, then we're into, how do we, as a people function, and then I'm going to go down into talent acquisition shortly, but as a wider people function, how can we, as people and as a service, start to raise the profile of what we do? Well, the great news is it's not rocket science. And the great news is there is a blueprint. So if you were to look at positions that go from their role in a board to the CEO, about 40% of those pretty much recognised come from the CFO's position. About just shy of 30% come from either marketing or product. And the rest come from founders or entrepreneurs or people that are stupid enough to set businesses up. So the blueprints are there. If we look at on the left-hand side of this screen here, you've got, have I got enough customers? So the first thing people do is they say, what's our brand promise? Who are we trying to talk to? What are our products? How are we going to engage? Who are we? What's the DNA of our organization? Then they start to turn that promise into a brand. It's a very distinct difference. Who are we on our DNA? That's researched and persona driven. Then out of that is how we're going to communicate. What tools, what channels, what products are we going to target at that persona, that DNA? And then finally, most importantly, how do I measure the success of my function? So, history lesson again, because I'm old. But in living memory, you got points where marketing people used to work for salespeople. And they used to create adverts on TV. And they used to say, it's great for our brand, but they could never measure it. And as a result, they used to report to salespeople. Over the last 20 years, marketing has been a huge growth in the organization. Why? Because it changed how it measured everything. We now, every single analyst report, if any of us are lucky enough, or maybe unlucky enough to work in PLCs, then you'll start to see any analyst report, the very first page will start to say things like, my customer value is this, my lifetime customer value is this, my average basket value is this, the cost of customer acquisition is this, the cost of customer retention is this. Those metrics directly link to the balance sheet. And as a result, over the last 20 years, CMOs have become CEOs because they drive an organization. And all of those analyst reports, by the way, the CEO or the chairman will say right at the very end, but my people are my most important asset. Not a single metric. So the second thing in finance are easy, right? So they have an investor promise because they'll tend to have shareholders, or people internally will be shareholders, or you'll have public shareholders. You need to tell people what journey you're on so you can secure more investment or keep people in an organization. The budget is really their journey, and they have loads of solid metrics about their conversion from revenue to profit, their growth year on year, their trends, etc., etc. So they have a purpose, they have a plan, and they have a way of measuring it. If we look to that to people functions, now I'm not saying every people function doesn't have this, and I'm sure people in this audience will have some really brilliant people strategies, but they're still not in the same ascendancy as finance and marketing. We still confuse the words EVP and employer brand as if they're almost the same thing, but they're not. What is our DNA? How do we research the personas of people that stay in our business, people that perform in our business, people that sounded great for the first year but actually delivered nothing? How do we create that? How do we link that into selection? How do we link that into development? We don't do these things. So then how do we articulate to all the different types of talent in all the different parts of the world that we have? I don't see many organizations where that is as sophisticated as it is to our customers, but exactly the same job. And then finally, in terms of data and insights, far too often, and this isn't the world according to me, there's so much literature about it, we as a people function give maths to protect our job, not to drive a company. So we talk about things like cost per hire or retention or whatever. We don't talk about the impact of hires we make or the impact of talent in our business in terms of revenue, in terms of balance sheet altering stats. So the blueprint's there. The opportunity's there. We could almost just cross out customer, say colleague, and we could pretty much follow a lot of the same values and a lot of the same metrics. But we haven't, as a group and as a collective, done that just yet. So, going back into something a bit more TA-based, how does that play out? And what is our opportunity? The first thing we've got to do is kind of build three big core components. And I urge you to have a look at it, right? So we talk to TA directors all the time, and we tend to say, have you got a strategy? Almost every one of them will say, yeah, I've got a strategy. What is it? And most people, about 60, 70% of them will start talking a lot at that point. And they'll say about where they're going and what they're doing and why the things are different. And you'll just say, just send it me. About 5% of people can send you what that strategy is. And about 1% of people can send that on a page. Now, if you can't articulate what your strategy is, then you will never be considered as strategic. So, what does that actually mean? Create yourself a vision and make sure that vision aligns exactly with where the business is going. Draw your line between the success of the organization as is articulated by your leadership in a succinct and clear way that's relevant for talent acquisition. The next thing is be really honest about where we are today and where we need to be and how we're going to get there. I always think about it like if you're at the coffee shop and the CEO comes next to you and says, what do you do? The vision's the first thing you say. That shouldn't be more than 10 seconds long, and it should come out of your mouth like you absolutely mean it. Now, if that goes really well, any CEO is going to say, oh, what does that mean? The next thing is your strategy. This is what I've got to do. This is where we are at the moment. This is what I'm trying to achieve, and this is the impact it's going to make on you. And all of a sudden, you instantly become someone that is valuable and someone who's going to impact the organization. But I wonder how many of us, either as a TA strategy or as part of a TA strategy, could do that. Simple test. Test yourself all the time. Dead simple. Then the last bit is about data and insight. So why does it matter? And ask yourself the question in that point, am I creating metrics that are just really keeping my job? So metrics that are just really keeping your job are how many CVs you send for an interview, how many of those get how many CVs you send to a hiring manager get an interview, how many offers get accepted, how quickly does any of that process take, how much does it cost in any way, shape or form. Any of those are keep your job metrics. How can you draw a line between the impact of that hire after it starts and why does that matter? Because on one sense, you could be quite transactional. When you start to value the impact of what you're doing, you become something that a board might want to listen to. Okay. So, rather than talk about things and go whatever, I'm quite a visual person. So what we've tried to do here, I'm sure we can make these slides available, is just talk you through how that might look and what that might be. Now, none of this is supposed to be directly relevant to yours. This is the template that you might want to use. But on the left-hand side is your business strategy. So that's not yours. But your job in that black column on the left-hand side up here is to show you know the organization as well as that CEO does. You understand your business. Document it. The right-hand side with a whiter background is then what that means for talent acquisition. Your vision aligns to the business vision. Your pillars. There's only 5 of them. Now, you might name them slightly different things. You might use them slightly differently. You might articulate them slightly differently. But demand planning, really critical. We see so many TA directors say, oh, our workforce planning is rubbish. But you've got intelligence that could make that better. How many people did you hire last year? Where's your business plan going? How many acquisitions are you going to do? What countries are you going to open? You can create a demand plan. In the absence of it, don't be a victim. Take control. What skills in your organization are going to have an impact on the balance sheet? And so what are you doing differently in talent acquisition to impact that? That's demand planning. Employer brands, how are you going to articulate your EVP to all of the candidates, internally and externally? How are you going to create compelling experiences through technology and onboarding and selection? What tech and data do you have to automate it? And do you have the right team doing the right jobs for now and for the future? And is there an opportunity for that team to grow in their path and in their careers? Key things in here, DNA. ED&I isn't a standalone pillar. It weaves in everything. It's a red thread. So are your values, so are your behaviors, so is the purpose of the business. Not standalone. You address things like that through the entire part of your talent acquisition strategy. And then finally, measure your outputs. Not just in terms of keep your job, but in terms of find a way of impacting the balance sheet. Once you can start to articulate that, and you know it, and your team know it, and everyone else knows it, I take you back to that conversation in a coffee shop with the CEO. What do you do? How are you going to do it? Now, your answer to that question will dictate whether you have an impact on a board meeting. Is it worth listening to, or is it not? Done. 2 minutes early.